I just rely on my authentic curiosity, because I can fake curiosity for 10 minutes, but not for an hour.
From Mamma Mia, I'm Mia Friedman, and you're listening to the No Filter Summer Series, where we look back at some of my favourite candid conversations that count. Richard Fidler doesn't like to be interviewed, but he does like interviewing other people. He records up to 300 conversations a year as the host of Conversations on ABC Radio, which is a daily show and a very popular podcast. But he very rarely gets interviewed himself. Way before I started No Filter, before I even really knew what the word podcast was, I had a vision board, and on my vision board was a picture of Richard Fidler and the logo for Conversations on the ABC, because I used to listen to it religiously, and I really thought that it was my dream job. He's taught me so much about interviewing and about listening, how to be a good listener. And so when I asked him onto my podcast a little while ago, he was a little bit hesitant, but because he's very professional and we've known each other for many years, since he was the first co-host along with Libby Gore of the Cosmo radio show, he said yes. And so he let me pick his brains about what goes into making the perfect interview. Here is the king of the radio interview, Richard Fidler. Richard, welcome.
You see, I don't know how to be interviewed, though, so we've both got each other at a disadvantage
I'm
here.
so glad.
Yes.
Okay, so you're not going to be judging me because you're going to feel like I'm judging you.
That's right. And, you know, you can probably tease me till I cry, and there'll be nothing I can do about it.
I can't wait for that. From 1984 to 1994, which is before some of our listeners were even born, you were a member of the very successful musical comedy troupe, the Doug Anthony Allstars, with fellow comedians Paul McDermott and Tim Ferguson. Now, when you're trying to explain to millennials what role the Doug Anthony Allstars played in the Australian pop culture, what's the best way to put it?
Some filthy, annoying bit of noise on the side, really. I think that
Were you
was
kind
the
of like
thing.
a musical chaser boys?
Yeah, to some degree. I think what they do is very different from what we did back then.
Or the axis of awesome.
Yeah, there's a bit of that, I suppose. Yeah, It's all sort of thrown in. There was three of us. We wore stinking costumes. We were pretty and young.
You were.
We wrote our own stuff, and our entire show large parts of our show were based on intense confrontation with the audience, bullying them, and when they did what we wanted, we'd tell them off for being sheep.
That's the worst nightmare of anyone sitting in an audience, is audience participation.
Our costumes stank so much, we never washed them. We had these costumes, these jackets.
Why didn't you wash them?
Because we were a bit pretty, and having
you were very pretty.
and having these stinky, foul costumes just stopped us from turning into I don't know, Take That or something like that.
Did you have groupies?
Yeah,
You must have had groupies.
Tim called them jokies at the time, and they were never at all interested in the show. See, when we started out, we sort of thought we were going to be we wanted to be a sort of like a comedy version of the Sex Pistols, and then when we started going on, and when we started going on TV, suddenly we got this teenage girl following, which was really shocking to us because we thought we were too stinky for that, and they started screaming at our shows.
Was stinky. Yeah, I was probably one of those teenage girls.
Were you?
Yeah. I mean, you were all very attractive, and there weren't a lot of kind of young, funny men in public life. It was all sort of old newsreaders and old fusty actors, and you guys were... The goodies were around that time too. Another reference that millennials won't understand. Yeah. Okay, I'm going to come back to that in a minute. You spent a lot of time in the UK and Australia because you had quite big international success, and you toured a lot, didn't you?
Yeah, we did a lot of TV in the UK and toured all over the place, the United States, Canada. We went to the Barcelona Olympics in 1992, which...
to compete?
About that. Yes, and the most vulgar act in the entire city at the time when we won it.
You won it?
Yes. Well,
the Olympics?
Yeah, do you remember that? Tell me if I'm straying too far off the path here.
Never.
But there was this moment... At the end of the Olympics, we were doing a show as part of the cultural festival in this big, big park, the city park in Barcelona. And the Olympic mascot that year was this cute little dog called Kobe. And Paul McDermott, beautiful artist, could actually do the design of Kobe, painted it, Kobe, on a huge sheet which we unfurled at the end, and it said, Kobe es muerte, Kobe is dead. And he had an image of Kobe with a noose around its neck and losing control of its bodily functions, as you do. And we unfurled this in front of families in this park, and the response was amazing. Like half the audience who was sick to death of the Olympics got to their feet and cheered, and the other half were hiding their children's eyes eyes from the exposure to the whole thing. Yeah, it was a wonderful moment.
I can only imagine you boys on the road. The group split in 1994. Why did you split?
10 years. We started to get our own lives.
How old were you when you started? Were you teenagers when you first formed?
Very early 20s. And so we just went from our 20s, 20 to 30, really. It was all after our 20s. By then, a few of us had, were married or had kids. And I think there's only so far you go with those things anyway. Was it a mutual decision? Did everybody want to leave at the same time, or it was a bit messier than that at the time?
I do recall it being a bit messy.
It was a bit messy. I mean, Tim wanted to do something else, and I suppose, to be honest, I think at the time I was kind of glad that the plug was pulled. When you're in a group like that, you sort of follow your star for a while, and you sort of think, well, you sort of believe in that, and you all stay together, and you follow that star, and then after a while, you just want to kind of kill that star. You just want to actually or tear it down and just get rid of it and find something else to do.
Is that because it becomes a bit constricting?
Constricting, and it sort of just gets a bit. Yes, it does become constricting. I suppose that's it. And I think you want to do. All of us wanted to do different things, and that kind of boyish, just out of high school, just out of uni enthusiasm that we had, sort of transmuted into something else.
You wrote in 1996 Real Wild Child, A History of Australian Rock and Roll, that was published on CD.
That's right.
Remember CDs?
CD-ROM, that was.
And during
CD-ROM was the wave of the future, Mia. Do you remember that?
Floppy disks.
Yes, that's right.
You hosted numerous shows during this time. I've forgotten about all of this. Race Around the World, which I loved, which is when John Safran came from, and a number of other people whose names I forget. A lot of them are working in journalism still.
Olivia Rousset, Ben Davies, a whole lot of people.
I remember that was a fantastic show. Aftershock, Mouthing Off and Vulture. And then in 2002, you went to the other side of the camera and were named Head of Television Comedy for the ABC.
Not really. That wasn't that senior. I was editorial manager, which meant I sort of had to keep an editorial eye on comedy rather than sort of run the whole department. Yeah, so yes, I did that for a couple of years too.
I imagine that wasn't at all political.
No.
And then in 2005, you moved into radio. So you took the 7 to 10 p.m. shift on ABC local radio in Brisbane.
My word, you have all the facts at your hand.
Thanks to Eliza, I do. And you said at the time something interesting. You said, in 2005, I left the world of TV behind and joined the ABC radio. I wish I'd made the move sooner.
Yes.
Why?
Radio is so much more satisfying. I mean, I notice we're making a podcast here and not a kind of
video.
Video.
Sit-down video.
Yeah, exactly. Because it's much richer. It's a much richer medium. I mean, I watch TV like anyone else does. I think sort of sit back in the couch with a remote, going, flicking through the channels, and you sort of get the initial visual impressions count a lot. But radio's different. Radio creeps up on you. You're often listening to it while you're doing something else. Like I listen to podcast or radio while I'm, making breakfast or cleaning up around the place or painting the house or something like that, or going out for a walk or on the bus or something like that. And it's more beguiling and richer, and you can go into much more strange and interesting places. So radio is a much richer medium, I find. I enjoy it a lot more. I don't know if I really know that much about TV, even after working in 15 years or so in TV. There was so much about TV I just never quite got. But I think I do understand radio a lot better than I ever understood TV.
There's a lot of faffing around in TV, a lot of waiting, a lot of depending on other people. What I love about podcasting, and I guess radio, is that it's just you. It's just you and the audience. There's not 100 different people making decisions, and
that's right. And you can talk to people who aren't famous. Yes,
exactly. Or famous.
Yeah, and they don't get intimidated so much. The whole presence of cameras will make a lot of people just freeze up and be careful and pass everything they say through their minds and self-edit. Radio trick, I think, with radio is to have a conversation with someone in an environment where they stop seeing the environments and forget that there's a big audience out there, and make it a conversation between two people and a third person who is the listener. And, if I've got a guest who's worried about the big audience that might be listening, I say, oh, no, it's just one member, one person's listening to this, because they only listen to it one person at a time.
Oh, that's nice. How did you learn how to interview? Because you're just the most sublime interviewer in the world.
Oh, thank you. Well, I mean, it's not... I think it wasn't that hard. I mean, I'm a very curious person. I read a lot when I was on on the road with the Doug Anthony Allstars, I read lots and lots of books because this is pre-internet and I had nothing to do but read tons and tons of books in the back of a stinking Tarago. There's that stinky thing again. And I always liked. I'm quite a curious person. I'm curious about a lot of different things, and I've wanted to kind of extend my education out of uni all throughout the rest of my life. And I kind of realised early on that I could just harness that in a 7-year-old that wants to ask lots of questions in a very unguarded way. And that's why that helps a lot, I think. I really always wanted, and I talked about this with Ira Glass when I talked with Ira Glass in the United States. We perfectly agree on this, dropping the whole idea of the interviewer as this kind of high priest or priestess who knows everything already, who's too cool to even ask a question, that will just make a statement. They'll say, like, Richard Fidler, you did this, 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 this. The answer to that is, well, yes.
I just did that.
Yeah. No, you had a question at the end, you see.
Did I?
Yeah, you did. No, there's a difference there. And I think I think pretending you know everything at the outset, Ira said this, was it cuts you off to discovery, to curiosity, to humour, to being wrong.
To being in the moment.
Yeah, to being in the moment and being surprised. And that's a beautiful thing when that can happen in radio, where you go, oh, really?
Your reactions, that's very true. There's a few things about your interviewing style, and I have had the privilege, and it was a privilege. That sounds so wanky. I'm about to use the word journey.
Journey.
Of being interviewed by you, and I'd always, I mean, you were the original. You're the first podcaster before the word podcaster existed. Your Conversations is the most downloaded podcast on the ABC. You've been doing
probably
it
in Australia, just quietly too. Yeah.
Yeah, in Australia, it's always top of the iTunes charts, and you've been doing it since. When did you start? 10 years. We just said 10 years.
Well, podcasting for about 8, I think. Yeah.
And way before podcasting was ever a thing.
Yeah, we had to do this thing that started. I remember around about 2008. It was just like another damn thing the ABC needed us to do at the end of the day. You know, this podcast. And it wasn't until I started listening to those great. That kind of first wave of brilliant American
This
podcasts.
American Life.
Yeah, and Radio Lab and The Moth and Mike Duncan's History of Rome and all these things that opened my ears and eyes to what a podcast could be. And I went, oh, wow, these guys have sort of been going in this direction that I've been sort of feeling my way towards for the last few years. I want to meet those people and find out how they do what they do and go along those same lines, travel in that same place.
The thing about being interviewed by you, which I always tell people because you just have such a very diverse fan base, is you don't break eye contact. And I've learnt so much about that. And I remember reading the same thing about Andrew Denton, who is obviously a sublime interviewer with enough rope, and he has the extra component of it being on TV at the same time. But he said he does a lot of preparation, but he doesn't bring a single note out with him. And when I was interviewed by you, you didn't look down at your notes even one time. And I've always remembered that, and it's such a lovely experience because it's quite disconcerting if you're being interviewed and someone's looking down and looking away from you. It doesn't feel like a conversation. It feels like an interrogation much more. How do you do that? You must be super prepared beforehand, or do you just wing it and go with your curiosity?
No, I don't wing it at all. No, I'm careful. I do tons and tons of preparation with the help of brilliant producers that I work with. I do lots and lots and lots of preparation.
How? Tell me how it goes.
Oh, well, it depends. If there's a book, I read the book and then make notes out of the book and break it down and turn it into a format that'll work for radio. If a book is multilinear, that won't work so well. Radio's pretty linear. You know, it's one thing after another, and that can run chronologically or thematically, or you can start here and go back and come back again. But it's sort of got to progress in a line, and you can't branch. Well, I find don't want to branch out too far away and get lost in the woods somewhere else, and then have to find my way back again. So I think structurally, about how to construct it in a great big arc. For the whole
I was going to ask you about that, because it's not just what you ask, it's what you don't ask, right? Because otherwise you can go down a million rabbit holes and then the hour's up and you didn't get past when they were 7. Yes.
That's happened once too, by the way.
Really?
Yeah, that happened once. But the rule of thumb for that, for what I don't ask, is it boring? That cuts away that solves your problem almost straight away. The other one is it could be too interesting, so wildly interesting. It's what a friend in America calls an exploding chicken. So your conversation might be about this or this or this, but over here suddenly they've done something else that's so wildly different. They lived in an Amish community for 10 years, or something like that. Something that's wildly different, and that can be like an exploding chicken. So you chase that, the chicken explodes with you. You're covered in blood and feathers, and you go, "What were we talking about again?" And
so you can't get back to it.
You can't get back to it. So I'll try and find a way to bring it in. Try and find a way to do that. But sometimes things are just so tangential. I just go, we're just going to leave that alone, or do it on another interview and make it all about that another time.
Because I wanted to understand this, because so much of what people tell you when they're telling stories, not just you, but when people are telling stories, it's pretty boring. Like, really.
Yeah.
People, I'm becoming more and more aware of this, that people think things are really interesting and they're actually not interesting to anyone else.
Yes.
But I was listening to you interview a woman today who is an ant specialist. Could there be a more boring topic?
No,
and yet...
You're kidding.
You were gripped,
yes.
and I was gripped. And somehow it followed... There were no rabbit holes or ant warrens or whatever you would call them. Somehow I was like, and then what's going to happen? And then what's going to happen? How do you do that?
I just rely on my authentic curiosity. Because I can, I often say this, I can fake curiosity for 10 minutes, but not for an hour. And I have done conversations in the past where I've had a guest on because I thought I ought to have them on, not because I've been really interested. And I listened back, and
can you give me? Don't tell me who it is, but can you tell me the type of person that would be? Would it be
a worthy thing? A worthy
politician
thing.
or someone who's
no? It's a really nice person, and it's not their fault.
And they've done a lovely thing.
They've done a lovely thing, but I just I don't know. I just wasn't that interested.
Yeah.
And rather than me sounding, I listen back, and I don't sound bored. I sound kind of hyper instead because I'm trying to G myself up, and I'm laughing too much, and I just go, oh God.
Do you listen back to your interview?
Yes, I do. Yes.
Still?
Yes, of course. Yes.
Why do you do that? I mean, everyone says that you should, but it's really hard.
Not every day. Most of the time, sometimes if I've had a really good program, I don't think it's been really good. Like I spoke to this guy recently about his ice addiction. He had a whole big story about that was kind of really fascinating.
Yeah, that was
one of my kids to hear that. And so when I went out for dinner, I played it for the whole family to listen to because I knew they'd all get something out of it. And I really liked hearing myself
back then. It's a teaching moment.
It was a teaching moment, but it was more kind of, it was compelling and weird as well. And I really liked hearing my own voice there. But when I'm not good, I just really want to get a barbecue skewer and stick it in my eye. It's just terrible. I'm just trying to make stuff that I can live with, really, at the end of the day.
I'm so glad you say that.
Yeah.
Do you ever listen to yourself and go, shut up?
Yes.
Don't interrupt.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, I do. That happens all the time. I go, oh, God, they were about to say something. It doesn't happen. That just
it doesn't happen all the time to you.
But it does happen sometimes. And I go, oh, I stepped on that. Oh, shut up. Like I really try to make a virtue of me keeping my mouth shut as an interviewer and really keeping very still and listening, and hearing the natural pause. The times when I don't do that is when the guest is sort of getting a bit carried away and talking and losing track of things and is just fascinated with the sound of their own voice and waffling. That's when, or when they're someone who's just reciting something they know off by heart and it's feeling a bit stale, then I'll step on them a bit. Then I'll try and break them up and break their rhythm. Yeah.
Because there's nothing more stressful to me as a listener than when I'm listening to radio and someone will ring in. It happens on Talkback, and someone will ring in and they'll be telling a story, and you know that it's almost time for the news, or that they've got to wind up, or they'll be going, and I'll get really anxious in my body. But that never happens with you.
No.
It's like
No.
Why aren't people boring on your show?
Well, that clock you're talking about there hitting the news. If you're feeling anxious as a listener, I'll tell you what, the presenter is going out of their mind. The worst thing is when someone shares something amazing at about 2 minutes to, and you go, I am so sorry. And it just feels awkward and horrible and stupid. But most of the time I know what they're going to say anyway, and I'm going to give that person plenty of space to tell whatever story that is that they want to tell well before we get to midday on my live-to-air show, so that the last 5 minutes at the very least can have some kind of reflection, which I can shape quite easily.
What makes a good interview and what makes a crap one?
Okay.
And do you know before you go in?
Not always, but you have a pretty good idea. It has to be good always to begin with, otherwise I wouldn't do it. It'd be too boring and I'd hate myself. I'm going to put that barbecue skewer in my eye that I was telling you about, Mia. So it's got to be, I'm pretty sure it's going to be good, and nearly always it is. But the thing that makes, I think, for me, something really wonderful is weirdness. Weirdness. When there's something right out of left field that is strange, that is just damn odd, or makes you go, what, like that, really? And that's one of my favourite questions.
Give me some examples.
Well, a good example. I interviewed the late Lincoln Hall. Remember Lincoln Hall, the climber,
climber.
Yeah, who went up to the top of Everest. On the way down, suffered oxygen deprivation. Yeah, so there's a name for that that eludes me at the moment. Fought off the Sherpas he was with because he was insane.
Yeah,
and spent the night on Everest. No one's ever done that before, and he survived somehow. Somehow he survived that night, and wrote this very strange book where he talked about the hallucinations he went through, about meeting other people up there, going into a stone cottage, looking out at a village below, which he realises now were the stars in the sky, taking off the top of his jacket. You know, he did this. He shouldn't have survived that. And there was this really amazing moment where I said, so you're up there and you're just on this sign of the line of life and death. And he said, or over it. Oh. And there was this kind of pause as I kind of tried to compute what he was saying. What do you mean? He said, well, I think I died up there. Oh. And yeah, it's like that. I mean, you know, when you hear that, it kind of... and he didn't want to be new agey about it, and he didn't want to go much further than that. But he said, he did think he'd stepped over it. That was not in his book. It was something he just had to say. It just blurted out of him like that. And I love moments of weirdness like that. Weirdness and strangeness. And it doesn't always have to be eerie. Sometimes, something hilariously stupid could be fantastic as well. That's the other end of things. You know, when people are funny, that's glorious.
Not everybody is a natural storyteller, and a lot of the people you speak to have probably never given an interview before. I mean, Ant Lady, she was Cate Blanchett in your hands. I mean, she was extraordinary and captivating. How do you give them advice? How do you...
Yes, I don't, but my producers do.
Yeah.
She was the subject, because she'd not written a book. Like, we make a real thing on my program of talking to people who've never been on radio before or have done very little radio, because we call them sort of, everyday people or unfamous people. Listeners love those stories because they feel they can measure their own lives against them. And with people like that, they're subject to a long pre-interview with one of my producers, Pam or Michelle or Jenna. And that will take about 5 hours, 3 to 5 hours.
Wow.
Yeah, very, very lengthy. And they're pretty good at helping shape how that's all going to work as a narrative. Because there is something ultimately quite deceptive about what I do in my program. We kind of turn a life into this narrative arc. But our lives aren't like narrative arcs. I mean, was your life a narrative arc today? I mean, it wasn't. I mean, no part of it is. Our lives are much messier, much more formless, much more incoherent than the way we present them on my program. And I often mention that occasionally just to remind listeners of that there's a kind of editing that takes place with this, even when it's live to air, in order to tell a story, to make it coherent.
Compelling.
Yeah.
You've interviewed people who've suffered incredible tragedy. Can you think of any of those? And also then how you have to tread very, very carefully, survivors of sexual abuse, survivors of crimes, people who've seen loved ones murdered. How do you then tackle those interviews when you've got a very fragile, vulnerable subject in front of you?
That's a very good question. I can only do so many of those. And it's a little cowardly of me because I feel terrible. I really do feel the part of that horror of it and the pain of it. And it's just, I'm not saying I'm a terrific human being or anything like that. It just asking that question, I have to find a way to ask that question that's not intrusive, that's not a 60 minutes type of question. It's not like, your whole family died in a flaming plane crash. How do you feel? That kind of thing. It's just the opposite of that.
I've only had to do it a couple of times, but it can feel icky, can't it?
Yeah, it can. It can feel exploitative and cheap.
Yeah.
And it's like I'm having a holiday in your misery. And I really don't want to do that.
And it's like, and then what happened?
Yeah.
And then what could you see?
Yeah, so I don't want to be voyeuristic about it.
No.
I want them to be able to talk about it. And that can't be the end in itself. And then there are people who can talk about these kinds of things that have happened to them in the most amazing way. And the example I often bring up is the extraordinary Jill Hicks.
I was about to bring her up. That was an amazing interview.
Yeah, it's one of my favourite of all time. It was certainly helped by the fact that Jill's incredibly charismatic and she has this incredible voice and she has a kind of poetic imagination, but a kind of mixed with a kind of brutal realism. Jill, I have always, and this is kind of really weird, this is the weirdness of it once again, I've always wanted to know what it's like to stand next to a bomb as it's going off. Jill can tell you what it's like to stand near a bomb. She was one of the victims of the terrorist attack on the 5th of May in 2005 in the London Underground. Only by the most outrageous mix of circumstances was she ever even on that train, in that carriage, happened to be standing next to the man with the bomb. There was one person away from her when the bomb went off. She described that amazingly. I mean, what do you think a bomb going off sounds like when it happens right next to you? Boom, right? No. Jill said it's like this. It's like a sudden sharp intake of breath. And then blackness that's present, has a kind of an absence that has a presence at the same time. And finding your way through that, being suspended in that kind of perfect, inky, tar blackness. And thinking you're dead. And then hearing people talk to you. And then coming out of that. She could describe all that in such a way that, as she was telling it, she was kind of fascinated by it. As she was telling me about it, and I was every bit as fascinated as she was. And I can tell when someone's telling their story so beautifully, Mia, because there's this kind of real sweet spot I find with a guest when they're sitting back, the whole world has fallen away. They're talking to me and looking at me sort of like I'm looking at you, but a little bit beyond. And what they're doing is they're seeing the movie of what they're describing play behind their eyes. And they're talking about it as they see it and as they remember it. And that gives them the detachment from what they're going through that's required, that gives them a kind of agency and a power over that incident that makes it something else altogether. And it's not like, I'm trying to make you cry, because I don't want to make people cry. I really don't.
That must happen, though. What can you think of times when people have just kind of
a couple of times
started to cry?
Yeah.
And what do you do?
You let them cry, actually. You let them have a bit of a tear. And then I might be actually having a bit of a tear. Pam, my producer, will walk in with a tissue box, because she'll be having a tear. And then we'll go, and then sometimes if it's an awful thing that's happened, you just go, well, bloody hell. And yeah, I think the thing that in radio you fear dead air, people fear quiet and silence, but I don't fear it at all. I love silence, and I'm prepared to let that happen because that's natural, and you just let the silence happen. Let them then they'll take a breath, and then they'll be back. They'll be fine. Yeah, I trust them. I've never had anyone weep like
sob. Have you had anyone walk out?
No. Oh,
Maybe.
A couple of authors behave like little bitches, though.
Really?
Me want to walk out, yeah.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Who are the most difficult people to interview?
Musicians and comedians. Musicians,
as a former comedian and musician yourself, tell me about that.
Musicians, because... and it may be because they may even be really trying, but musicians are songwriters because they put what they want to say into something that's a beautiful bit of artifice, which is a song. And talking about it, it's like, well, no, it's in the song. What I want to say is actually in the song. And so musicians tend to not be very articulate. And maybe the more articulate they are, perhaps they're not so good as a songwriter.
Is that why Beyonce doesn't give interviews?
Yeah, very probably, and she's probably wise to do so.
Would you knock her back if you...
Oh, probably, if she's boring. But I don't think she's boring, is she?
She wouldn't be boring.
No, she's kind of fabulous.
Yeah,
but if they're boring, yeah, I mean, I'm not going to name names here. We've actually knocked back some quite famous people because they're just not interesting enough. And I know they're just going to give me this kind of half-assed bit of energy. They're not going to treat the show as special. They're going to treat me like as interview number 5 on the Publicist chat sheet for the day. No, thank you. No, I'm not interested in. You and I, we've both met enough celebrities to know what that's all about. And
you tend to not go with whoever's just in town.
No.
Spruiking something.
No, very rarely.
Is that because
they're tired, they're low energy, they're boring most of the time, and they've done 10 interviews in one day and they've got no energy for you? I'll very rarely do, movie stars, very rarely. Unless they're older and they've written a memoir and they want to talk about their lives rather than have their brains. Because they've been dealing with, women's magazines trying to creep into their every shitty little bit of their lives and make them look terrible. So
and they're very guarded.
And they're very guarded. And, of course, I would be too if I was in the situation. So they don't want to talk and I don't want to talk to them. So that works out just fine.
What are some of your other favourite interviews that you've done?
Well, the obverse of that
you must be asked this all the time.
No, the obverse of that is sometimes like the really big stars. Like some of the most important people tend to be the true movers and shakers sometimes are the ones who are the loveliest. Like Smokey Robinson is a guy who found Motown Records. He wrote My Girl, he wrote My Guy, he wrote all those songs for so many different groups. He's so talented, he has the most beautiful voice. He's the sweetest guy in the world, the loveliest man, and generous and funny and warm. Yeah, he had all that because he knows who he is. He's done he's done everything you can do.
He's got nothing to prove.
He's got nothing to prove, and he's still got a little bit of the little boy about him, which was just delightful. I loved speaking to him. So sometimes I find the really big stars are the ones who are the loveliest.
That's interesting. Who else?
Off the top of my head, I don't know. I can't think of any names now. It's all a bit of a blur.
I'm sure it's a blur.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I can't think of any off the top of my head.
You just got 10 years worth.
I know.
That's what, 500 interviews?
Oh, more like 5,000.
What?
Yeah.
5 a week?
Yeah.
For 10 years, 52 weeks a year.
Yeah.
Can I not add up?
No, I think it's. I don't know how many it is actually. Is it 10 or 5,000?
Oh no, you're right. Sure. It's 500 a year.
Yeah. Well, No.
What?
It's about 300 a year times 10. So what's that? 300, 3,000. 3,000. Yeah.
3,000. Good.
Yeah.
I think the maths is going well.
Yeah.
Particularly.
Yeah, that's right. That's why I'm in radio and not with the CSIRO, isn't it?
Now you and Tim and Paul had. You were estranged for quite a few years, weren't you?
No.
And or did you think?
No.
Oh, you weren't
really,
estranged?
No. I think we sort of we didn't see that much of each other for a while because we were sick to death of each other, I think. It wasn't like we were estranged, though. It wasn't like, we don't talk. We did get together every once in a while, although I haven't seen much of them lately. They've been on tour. I've been doing what I've been doing. I haven't seen the guys for about a year and a half, maybe longer than that now.
So they are back touring together.
Yes, with Paul Livingston this time instead of me.
Okay.
Yeah.
Tim has MS.
Yes.
And he's in a wheelchair now, I think.
Yes.
And they've both done various things as well. Was there talk of you joining them on this tour? Is it something that you've put away?
No, it's something I've put away. They were very nice, and they did ask me, bless them, quite a few times, and it's something I put away. I mean, I'm not going to quit what I'm doing now to go back to what I was doing then, I think. That's how I feel about it. I like what I'm doing now. I don't like nostalgia either. But, having said that, it sounds like they've turned the act into something completely different. I mean, for a start, Paul McDermott is now the tallest person in the group because Tim's in a wheelchair and Paul Livingston's a tiny bit shorter than him. So that just changed the whole dynamic right from the get-go, I think. And the fact that Tim is in a wheelchair, I mean, a lot of the humour we did was about cruelty. So I think that changes the whole dynamic of the show, and it sounds like they're writing new material, so they've changed it to something different, which is exactly what I would hope they'd be doing, and what indeed they are doing.
You burnt yourself?
That was about 4 years ago now. Yeah.
Oh, see, five.
5 years ago,
Stop
actually.
it.
5.
You were off air for quite a while. Tell me what happened.
Well, it was my birthday, and I was at home having a family dinner. My wife, who's the most amazing cook, was making a dish called Vietnamese bonfire beef. And there's a clue right there, Mia.
There we go.
There's a clue right there, okay? That's where you sort of have this little gas porter camp stove on the table. You have a dish, you put the beef in with all the spice and the sauce. It cooks sort of there in front of you. And it was all very nice, and we thought we'd have maybe it's a little bit more. The fire had gone down a bit. So Kim got a little bit more fuel, just a little bit more. And now we know you don't put cold fuel into a reservoir of hot fuel, into this little saucer that was there. and it was put in, and there was this sudden, this gigantic flame went up, and my shirt was on fire. Emma, my daughter, who was somehow intuited something was going to happen, I don't know how, just was nervous anyway about Kim putting more stuff in, and so she was out the door already. Joe, my son, was sitting next to me. He got the very edge of his hair tiny bit singed. The curtains behind us were on fire. My shirt was on fire. And that's something I found that I do when I am on fire. I will say the bleeding obvious, like, oh my God, I'm on fire. I have this tendency to state the bleeding obvious.
Just in case anyone was wondering, I am on fire.
And I liked that shirt I was wearing too. It was a nice shirt, but it was on fire. And
what was it like in that moment?
Oh, it's horrible. I mean, I had already had the thought and expressed it in the past that I think, burning alive is the worst way to die. And there it was, my shirt was on fire. And so I ran to the rumpus room, I think, and tore it off. And then ran straight into the bathroom and turned the shower on, because you should get it underwater. Any burns, I mean, if you don't know this already, if you're burnt, put it under cold water straight away.
And stay there. So
I stood in the shower. There's I could hear mayhem going on in the living room as Kim was trying to put the fire out. And I was shouting out. I remember shouting out from the shower. I called an ambulance. Are the kids all right? Are the kids all right? Are the kids all right? Poor Kim was trying to put this fire out, and then she screamed out, they're all right. She called an ambulance. I looked at my arm and it wasn't good. I mean, I can show it to you now if you like.
Show it to me now.
I lost all the skin on my forearm, and right up my arm and under my arm as well, and across my fingertips, across my fingers here, not my fingertips, my fingers, and
all on one arm,
and the skin across these on this hand, on the other hand, and it didn't look good. And I was in, it was weird. I was in a lot of pain, and this is weird. Pain is such a subjective thing. I know this now. I was in a lot of pain, but it was okay. It was okay because the kids were all right. Yeah. It's a weird thing. If the kids weren't all right, the moment Kim said the kids were okay, I was kind of okay. I could calm right down then. It's sort of like it was out of my hands. And the medics arrived, gave me one of those kind of little whistle things you have with tons and tons of morphine. And I had some of that and didn't do anything. Had another one, didn't do anything. They got this beautiful, beautiful handbase. Getting in the shower with me and injecting into my ankle, I think. It's all starting to get vague now. That didn't do really much at all, but I was feeling a bit groggy. They put me in the ambulance. I arrived at the hospital. I was given more and more and more morphine. And then I had this thing. I'm not a drug guy. I'm a drinking guy, that sort of thing. So I've never, ever had anything like an opiate. And I don't know if you've ever had morphine, but it's this weird thing, isn't it? It's like you sort of, you don't, it wasn't like I thought it was going to be. It was just like, I don't know, being in some kind of Buddhist temple somewhere, like everything was wind chimes and what have you. Huh. The nurse came by and said, are you okay? And I went, I'm fine. Like that, I was actually fine. I felt really happy and comfortable.
So do you feel out of it?
Yeah, sort of very present, but sort of not very present at the same time.
Sounds lovely.
So I'm hearing arguments going on, because it's casualty, I'm hearing arguments going on between people who've taken drug overdoses and what have you. But it was fine. And anyway, the doctor came around the next day, had a look at my burns and said, we're going to need to put skin grafts on this. So that was the painful thing. That was the really painful thing, actually.
Where did they take the skin from?
From my thigh. And so and when you have a skin graft, it's not the graft that hurts, it's the donor site. It's where they take it from that really hurts. I'm probably getting too much detail.
No, not at all. No. They have, because my nephew had one, they do it with this almost a potato peeler.
Yes,
I mean, not that,
yes.
But they shave it off,
yes,
right?
They do, that's right. And so I'm showing you now, like the skin on my arm, and it's still...
It's your leg skin, is it?
Yes, it's my leg skin. And you can see it's still textured, because they texture it so they can tell they can tell what the transplant skin is and what's not.
It is textured, so it looks like, with the magic of radio, it looks like you've been leaning against like sheets or a towel or something like that.
That's right. But they did a really good job, and like you can't really see the joint. The joint's pretty good. And so
the joint's fantastic, and
fine.
The texture's fine, and it's not hairy in the wrong part.
No.
On your forearm, the underside.
That's right. So it's fine. It's fine. So I was out of action for quite a long while. And then it's so easy to get addicted to painkillers. So they were giving me tons and tons of OxyContin for the pain. And I got home and Kim said, right, you're getting off that stuff straight away. And I went, well, let's not get carried away. I'll wean myself off. But I got off it. And then I got the flu and I felt terrible. Like I was, oh, God, just when I'm recovering, I've got the flu. But I didn't have the flu. I was actually getting
withdrawal.
Withdrawal, yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
And did you need How did you mentally process it? Like, I imagine there's an aspect of post-traumatic in that.
Well, that's interesting. No, there isn't. I'm weirdly untraumatized by it. I'm not.
Sure?
Yeah, I know. I keep waiting. I know it sounds like hey, everything's fine, but I keep waiting for nightmares. They've never happened. Never had nightmares. Never had anything like it. There was a really bad moment where Joe was going to my son was bringing me a cup of tea a couple of years later, where he tripped and spilled a tiny bit of tea on me, and I went like that. But
and if you see an open flame,
I was a bit weird around them for about a year, 2 years, but I'm fine. I'm fine. It's weird.
And the kids. Because that would be traumatic to see you go up in flames.
Yeah, they're okay. They're okay.
It's not what you want to see.
No, can you be more traumatised on behalf of your father, please? Please. Would you mind?
And then last year you took more time off. It was probably 7 years ago, was it? I thought it was last year.
No,
to go to
last
Antarctica.
Year. No, to Iceland.
Oh, I'm so good at my research.
It was cold. Well,
yeah,
not that
I knew
cold.
It was somewhere cold, and you were gone for a while. What were you doing? You were making a documentary.
Yeah, no, radio. I was making a radio series while I was there. One of my very best friends is a Viking.
Of course they are.
This guy's name is Kari Gislason. He lives around the corner from me. We're very good friends.
What do you mean he's a Viking?
He's from Iceland. He was born in Iceland, but has lived most of his life, divided his life between Australia and Iceland. He's
on the high sea.
On the high sea,
with a helmet with horns in it.
That's it, yes. He's Australian, but he speaks Icelandic fluently. Has lived there. He's got a doctorate in medieval Icelandic studies. So when I first became friends with Kari, he introduced me to these great works of literature called the Sagas of Iceland. The Sagas of Iceland are just some of the most amazing stories in the history of the world. They're like Shakespeare, and they're these great monuments of world literature. And they're these brilliant, amazing stories of the first Viking settlers to come to Iceland. And so we went there to Iceland together to make this Radio National series, a 4-part series, to go into the places where the saga stories actually happened 1,000 years ago or so, and to have Kari tell them in situ, but also to find out a mystery about Kari's family background, because Kari never knew his Icelandic father. His father, when Kari was born, his father already had a wife and 5 kids. And so Kari's ancestry he was never quite certain about the family connection. When he finally did make a connection to his father, he said, "Oh, you happen to be descended from the greatest of the saga authors, Snorri Sturluson. This is like the Shakespeare of Iceland." And Kari went, "What?" Like from not having a family.
Royalty.
Yeah, it's like being told you're descended from. He's also their leading statesman, so it's like being descended from Shakespeare and George Washington all at once. So we went over there to find out whether it was true, to find out whether there was a family connection through the bloodline all the way back to the greatest of the saga authors. And the sagas are things that Kari's loved all his adult life. So that's why we went there, and we're going back again in November to take some photos, tell some stories, and write a book.
Just quietly, just a few things.
Yeah, just a few things,
Just a few quiet things. As the kids get older, we were talking before we started to record about having teenagers. You were a bit of a rebel in your own time. What are you learning from your teenagers as a father?
My son has a band.
Yeah.
3-piece. He's really kind of into the whole idea of it being a 3-piece, not a 4-piece. It's pretty grungy. He's writing songs for them that are really good. I'm not getting involved. I'm staying, because who wants mum and dad dancing in front of your band? That's it. Yeah, we actually did. They had their first gig the other night, and we said, come along, we'll wear tracky decks and dance in front of you and go, these guys are great. Come on, everyone. I think it's different having Joe's so much. I feel like sometimes Joe is. I know exactly what it's like to be. I remember really, really well what it's like to be a teenage guy. Teenage girls are a bloody mystery, though. Like they always were, even when I was a teenager, Mia. So, you get things wrong all the time. But being a teenage girl is really complicated these days.
It's really complicated.
Yes.
Yeah. No, my theory is that we are parenting blind because all the stuff we did as teenagers, our parents also did. But all the stuff our teenagers are doing, we never did. Like, we never had the internet. We didn't have ICE.
No.
We didn't have ISIS. So we don't really have a playbook to know what's normal, what's not normal, what ages are appropriate to do various things.
I don't think they're having as much fun as we did. I think we
Really?
had more. Yeah, I think if it was role reversed and they'd grown up with the internet and we were the kids that didn't have it, they'd be going, you kids are crazy, you're going out all the time, you're going to listen to dangerous music, you're taking party drugs, you're staying out too late. Why can't you just be like, do what we did and stay home and look at the internet all the time?
It's very true. They are at home a lot more because they have very, very robust social lives without leaving their bedrooms.
Yeah, but there's a lack of human and animal intimacy in that's an issue. But, I don't want to go into too much because, it's a bit like being, Grandpa Simpson saying, there's nothing new in the world. The fax machine's just a waffle iron with a telephone attached, I mean, I don't want to be that guy. But, I think there's all those... I think you need to be in the room with someone, don't you, to be a proper friend? To
not
actually,
anymore.
Yeah, not to be. I think you do. I think you need to have a kind of a sense of the other's animal presence.
Are you a different kind of father to the father that you had?
My dad was a good dad. I think he had his flaws like a lot of dads, but he was a good dad, a very loving dad. Anyway, he never left me in any doubt that I was loved, and I try to do the same thing with my kids. I always tell them, just accidentally. I was working for a while in Brisbane with a colleague in radio who was quite a serious Christian, lovely man, and his teenage daughter was going through a goth phase. And I said to him, so how do you keep, contact with her? How do you keep, because she's probably not going to be into what you're into, Phil, seriously. And he says, no, she's not, no. So I said, how do you do it? What do you do? What are you doing? He says, well, one of the things I do is I surprise her. He says he rings her out of the blue every once in a while and just says, by the way, I just want you to know I love you. And it just completely, I know, it's a really nice thing to do. And she just goes, oh, thanks, Dad, I'm trying to remember that lesson. That's a good lesson, I think.
Yeah.
So I try and take your kids, it's a good idea to take your kids by surprise like that and out of the blue just tell them you love them, I think.
Do they think you were ever cool? No.
I know it irritates my daughter that I'm on radio. She goes, oh.
You must have groupies still.
No, yeah, right. No, I don't think so.
Certainly in the journalism world.
Emma came home from school once and she said, oh, the way girls do, I wish you'd give up your radio show. And I said, why? She goes, well, my teacher came up to me, she said, Emma Fidler, your father's radio program is magnificent. I'm kind of with her on that, it's terrible for her to hear that.
You should say, and I have sex too.
Yes. Yeah, I should do that, actually. That's a really good idea.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
Horrify her.
Yes.
Richard, thank you. Thank you for listening to the first episode of the No Filter Summer Series. If you love the show, please subscribe to us in Apple Podcasts and tell a friend. I know a lot of people are going to be listening to this on road trips and on long walks on the beach, maybe just those candid moments where you need to get away from your family or you're feeling a little bit lonely and you need some friends in your ears. You can also subscribe on Spotify or wherever you listen to your podcasts. I use a podcast app called Overcast. You may want to try that out. Next up in our summer series, Tracy Bevan on her friendship with Jane McGrath. This is one of the most talked about podcast episodes of No Filter that we have done. No Filter is produced by Eliza Ratliff. I'm Mia Friedman, and I'll see you on mamamia.com.au.